Right now, this is our time in the studio with Carolina Carroll. I welcome the viewers of Freedom. Let's get straight to the important news. Russian troops continue to terrorize the peaceful residents of Kherson. Today, from the temporarily occupied left bank, the Russian army launched yet another strike on residential neighborhoods in the central part of the city. According to Yaroslav Shonko, head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration, at this time, one person is known to have been injured. He is a 72-year-old man who has already received the necessary medical assistance. In addition, apartment buildings and one of the buildings of an educational institution were damaged. Russian troops launched a massive attack on Ukraine. Residential buildings and energy infrastructure were targeted in the strikes. In the Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Kirovohrad regions, and several other areas, the Russians struck with missiles and drones. There are fatalities and injuries. You can learn more about the aftermath of the night attack in the report by my colleague.
3 people were injured as a result of the Russian attack on Odessa. At night, the enemy launched UAVs at the city. One of the drone strikes hit the 22nd floor of a residential complex. Part of the high-rise caught fire. Residents were able to leave the upper floors of the damaged building on their own.
Careful, just the glass. Careful so it doesn't fly everywhere.
I was with my girlfriend at that moment. A split second, we hit the floor. A bright flash. I live on the 23rd floor, and if you look, the strike hit the 22nd. Luckily, it didn't go left or right. It hit the entrance directly, and no one was hurt. We went downstairs. Everything was destroyed. Window shattered. Everyone was in shock, panicking. People ran into the hallway from their beds, wrapped in blankets. My girlfriend and I went out in shorts. We just grabbed our documents, and...
Already in the morning, the Russian army attacked Odessa with missiles. In addition to the residential building, the Russian attack also damaged infrastructure facilities, commercial and warehouse premises.
We heard both the incoming missiles and the loud explosion.
Dnipro was also under a combined Russian attack. Valentina saw the aftermath in the morning when she arrived at work. The building where she rents a room for her sewing workshop was damaged by the destruction. Inside, the room is covered in broken glass. In
general, the sewing machines, some of them will need a technician to come and repair them here and there because things have shifted. But this window, this room, is like that. The room itself was badly damaged, mostly. Here are the windows, and I can't do anything because of the windows.
Not a single window survived in this office center. The ceilings were damaged in the neighboring building where the security company is located. The windows were also blown out. Several cars nearby were damaged as well. Destruction was also recorded at the facilities of the children's soccer school.
The lamps were shattered by the impact. The windows were blown out. There's plenty of work to do here. We'll get everything back in order.
The blast wave also blew out windows in apartment buildings located near the epicenter of the explosion. Since morning, utility services have been working on site, dealing with the aftermath of the night attack. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, Russian drones attacked a civilian car. The driver was hospitalized.
The road between Petropavlivka and Troitska is now unsafe as well. And
in the Sumy region, a woman was killed as a result of a Russian attack. Rescuers recovered her body from under the rubble of the destroyed house. 6 more people, including 2 children, were injured. In the Kirovohrad region, officials say a private house caught fire in the Novukransky district and vehicles were damaged. In the Donetsk region, on February 17th, a Russian UAV attacked a Sloviansk TPP worker vehicle. Unfortunately, 3 of them were killed.
Fortunately, 3 of them died. This is yet another reminder of just how high the price is for light and warmth in our homes.
In total, 12 regions came under attack by Russian forces last night. More than a dozen residential houses were damaged, as well as urban and critical.
The term infrastructure facilities refers to the fundamental physical and organizational structures and systems needed for the operation of a society or enterprise, including essential services such as transportation networks, communication systems, water supplies, and power grids, all of which are vital for maintaining economic productivity and ensuring the overall well-being of the general public in a modern world. And according to her, there were no casualties. The region is operating on hourly electricity outage schedules. During the massive strike last night, the Electronic Warfare Army launched 396 attack drones at Ukraine, 4 ballistic and the same number of Iskander cruise missiles, 20 Kh-101 missiles, as well as guided Kh-59 and Kh-69 missiles. a total of 25 missiles of various types and 367 UAVs were shot down or suppressed by electronic warfare systems. During a Russian night attack on Ukraine, Poland scrambled its military aircraft. This was reported by the operational command of the country's armed forces. Ground-based air defense and radar recognition systems were also put on alert. These actions were preventative in nature and aimed at ensuring the security of the airspace, the Polish command emphasized. Ukrainian defenders successfully struck enemy rear and operational infrastructure targets with drones in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. In Crimea, Special Operations Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces shot down a Russian Army K-27 helicopter and also destroyed a storage site for the Russian Iskander missile system. Powerful explosions were recorded at the site of the strike. In addition, Ukrainian forces struck the drone control center of the Rubicon unit of the military of the Russian Federation in the temporarily occupied territory of Zaporizhia region. Also, on February 17th, Ukrainian drones attacked the Ilsky oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. Ukraine's general staff reported powerful explosions occurred there. A large-scale fire broke out, covering an area of about 700 square meters. The Ilsky oil refinery is one of the largest enterprises in the oil industry in southern Russia. It is involved in supplying the Russian military-industrial complex. In addition, according to freedom sources in the security service of Ukraine, drones from the Alpha Special Operations Center struck the infrastructure of the Taman Neftegaz oil terminal for the second time this month. It is located in the Krasnodar region. SBU drones also attacked the Metafrax chemical plant last night. That's in the Perm region of Russia? This plant produces components for explosives and weapons. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported combat clashes on the front line. The most intense fighting is taking place in the Pokrovsk direction. There, Russian occupiers launched 42 assaults. There were 37 clashes in the Huliaipol sector, 16 in the Kostiantynivka sector, and 14 combat engagements recorded in the Lyman sector. The enemy also tried to break through Ukrainian defenses 11 more times in the southern Slobozhansky direction. Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,255,000 military personnel. Of these, 890 invaders were eliminated in the past 24 hours, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In addition, the day before, the Defense Forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 3 armored combat vehicles, 4 artillery systems, and 71 units of enemy automotive equipment of the enemy. The Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Alain Berset, met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv yesterday. They discussed the development of a compensation mechanism to reimburse damages caused by Russia's actions. In addition, Berset met with Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Sybiha. He provided information about the situation on the battlefield and in the energy sector following Russia's barbaric strikes, as well as about peace efforts and pressure on the aggressor.
The most important pressure we can exert is to always clearly demonstrate what we want to achieve together. Society is based on democracy, the rule of law, and the protection of human rights. The only way to achieve this is to establish peaceful relations based on the rule of law and to support the development of democratic values. After all, this is the only system in which citizens can make decisions. How should they be treated in the country? This is the only way to ensure reliable protection of human rights. For our part, we are doing everything possible to provide the necessary support.
Russian oil producers may have to significantly reduce production in the coming months, since Russian fuel exports continue to slow down. And according to the analytics company Kepler, the volume of Russian oil shipments by sea in December was 3,800,000 barrels per day, and since the beginning of February, that is 1 million barrels less. At the same time, the volume of Russian oil stored on tankers at sea has risen to a record level, and the pressure on Russian energy exports will intensify in the near future. Natalia Gusak will tell you more about this.
Ukraine has imposed sanctions on Russian citizens who use sports to serve the war, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced. The restrictions were prepared after the International Olympic Committee's decision to disqualify Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich because of portraits of Ukrainian athletes killed by Russia on his helmet.
This Ukrainian sanctions package is meant to be a signal to everyone in the world. a signal that you can't just turn a blind eye to supporting aggression. When Ukrainians at the Olympics are forbidden from even remembering the victims of Russian aggression, it is clearly a global retreat from justice. We will restore justice.
Now is the time to raise the cost of war for Russia like never before, says the head of the European Commission. And the 20th sanctions package, the EU will increase pressure on the aggressor, she assured. Ursula von der Leyen, we
are proposing a complete ban on maritime services, which could further isolate Russia and reduce its fossil fuel revenues, especially through close coordination with our partners from the Group of Seven in the United States. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, on social network X.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and Finnish President Alexander Stubb have called for continued military and economic support for Ukraine. And strengthening sanctions pressure is a powerful tool to make the Kremlin think about peace.
For Putin, this has become an economic failure. Reserves are depleted, growth is zero, inflation's in double digits, and the interest rate is 16%. He doesn't want to end this war because the political and social costs of bringing the soldiers back is too high. And then the question arises, what should we do? First of all, we need to ramp up economic pressure. Sanctions, maritime services, the shadow fleet, hit as hard as we can. And secondly, continue to provide Ukraine with all the necessary means, including tomahawks. Then we'll see it through to the end, and Ukraine will win this war.
Senator Lindsey Graham also supports Tomahawk strikes on military facilities in Russia.
I want the U.S. to provide the military with Tomahawks to effectively target and strike infrastructure targets, which Putin is counting on for the production of drones and other essential military equipment. I want to change the military balance.
Experts believe that the most painful sanctions for the aggressor country have been those targeting its energy sector. Moscow has effectively lost the European market and will soon lose it completely.
In 2021, we received 45% of our gas from Russia. Now we get just over 10%. So we've significantly reduced supplies, but even 10% is still too much. That's why this, too, needs to disappear. And by the end of this year, all LNG will be taken out of circulation, and then by the end of next year, the rest of the pipeline gas will disappear as well.
But alternative markets for Russian energy resources are starting to slump significantly due to Western sanctions. In December, India cut its imports of Russian oil to a 2-year low. As a result, China became the main buyer of Russian oil delivered by sea. But this has negatively affected the Kremlin's profits.
This led to Russian oil prices dropping by $9 to $11 per barrel below the icy Brent benchmark price. For January to February deliveries arriving in China, this is the absolute lowest level in the past several years for Urals crude, according to data reported by Reuters.
Economically, the Russian Federation today can rely almost entirely on its own resources to use what it has, to sell what can be sold abroad, and somehow try to use that money. But borrowing money on international markets, receiving direct loans, credits, or financial donations from countries on a bilateral basis, not to mention from international organizations, is not possible for the Russian Federation.
Analysts believe that coordination of efforts between the EU and the US could have an additional impact. In other words, it will further worsen the problems in the aggressor country's economy, which means it will affect the Kremlin's ability to continue the war against Ukraine. Natalia Hus, Volodymyr Stengelov for Freedom TV Channel.
A new round in negotiations between Ukraine, the U.S., and Russia has started in Geneva. This was reported by the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov. The meeting will be held behind closed doors. The Ukrainian delegation arrived in Switzerland the day before. Among them are the head of the president's office, Kirilo Budanov, his deputy, Serhiy Kislitsia, and the chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Andriy Hednatov. As Umerov stated, Kiev's main goal is to advance as much as possible those decisions that can bring about a lasting peace, achieve an energy truce, and address urgent humanitarian issues. The Russian delegation, meanwhile, consists of more than 20 officials, is headed by the aide to the Russian dictator, Medinsky. He did not participate in the previous rounds in Abu Dhabi. Kirill Dmitriev also arrived in the U.S. for economic contacts. The Russian side announced plans to discuss territorial aspects within the so-called anchorage formula. The American delegation in Geneva, like the Ukrainian one, has not changed. It's headed by U.S. President Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump advisor Jared Kushner. Donald Trump himself stated that he expects maximum activity from Kiev at the negotiations in Geneva and hopes for a swift agreement with Russia. The U.S. president emphasized that Ukraine's participation in direct dialogue is supposed to be a necessary element of the entire peace process. The White House also made it clear that Washington expects the Ukrainian delegation to quickly engage in substantive work. In Trump's opinion, Kiev's role in this round will be decisive. At the same time, despite the negotiations in Geneva, the Kremlin has not abandoned its energy terror against Ukraine. The massive Russian strike last night was both combined and deliberately calculated. It was designed to inflict as much damage as possible on the energy sector. This was stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Partners must respond to all these attacks against life. Russia must be held accountable for its aggression. Our diplomacy will be more effective if we are guided by the principles of justice and strength. The power of pressure on the Russian Federation, the effective sanctions, ongoing and timely support for the Ukrainian army and our air defense. To make peace real and just, we must influence the sole source of this aggression, because it is Moscow that continues the killings, the massive attacks, the assaults. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, Telegram.
Moscow understands only the language of pressure and will not take diplomacy seriously unless it is backed by force. This was stated by Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha. He noted that the Russians launched a massive strike on the country right before the round of negotiations in Geneva. And once again, Ukraine's critical infrastructure became the target.
New sanction packages are crucial. Blocking the shadow fleet, restrictions on maritime services, a ban on entry for participants in Russian aggression. Only our unity and strength will put an end to this war. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.